Hello everybody, my name is Eric. If you haven't noticed, I am a huge fan of supermassive games, and in particular the Dark Pictures Anthology, their latest outing. I love the interactive storytelling aspect of these games, and I also love that so far they're based in actual events, or in the case of Man of Medan, an actual ghost ship story. Ghost ships by themselves are intriguing for many reasons, not the least of which is the mystery surrounding them. The isolation of a ship at sea is a very real thing, and when one goes missing, or as in the case of the SS Ourang Medan, the crew dies or vanishes, the imagination is left to make its own conclusions. What happened to that ship, miles away from other eyes, and what happened to her crew, where no one could see? We'll start with what we'll call the official story. Official because it's printed in the May 1952 issue of the Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, published by the United States Coast Guard. The story takes place in the Straits of Malacca, a narrow stretch of water between the Malay Peninsula and the island of Sumatra. As the main shipping channel between the Indian and Pacific Oceans, it's considered to be one of the most important shipping lanes in the world. Now, according to the story, at some point around June 1947, two American vessels, named the City of Baltimore and the Silver Star, picked up several distress messages from the Dutch merchant ship Ourang Medan. Ourang is an Indonesian word meaning man, or sometimes person, and Medan is the capital and largest city on the island of Sumatra. Roughly translated then, Ourang Medan means man from or man of Medan. A radio operator aboard the Ourang Medan sent the following message in Morse code. SOS from Ourang Medan. We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead. This was then followed by several confused dots and dashes of Morse code, and then very clearly, I die. After that, silence. When the Silver Star crew eventually located and boarded the apparently undamaged Ourang Medan, the ship was found littered with corpses. The bodies of the crew were sprawled on their backs, their faces frozen in fear, wide eyes and staring, mouths gaping open, described as horrible caricatures. No survivors were found, and no visible signs of injuries on the bodies were observed. The boarding party also noted that even though the outside temperature was in excess of 100 degrees Fahrenheit, there was a very sharp chill aboard the Medan. Just as the ship was to be prepared for a tow by the Silver Star to a nearby port, a fire suddenly broke out in the ship's number 4 cargo hold, forcing the boarding party to quickly evacuate the freighter. Soon after, the Ourang Medan was witnessed exploding before finally sinking. Now, admittedly, that's a pretty chilling story. Imagine being a sailor aboard the Silver Star, boarding the dead freighter. You're hit with a chill straight to the bone, even though it's hot out. You find men dead, the look of terror etched on their faces forever. Even the ship's dog is dead, and there's no obvious cause. That's pretty scary, right? I'm not superstitious, but that's got some serious let's get out of here Scoob vibes to it. Of course, there are some problems with that story, not the least of which is that the Silver Star at the time was registered under a different name. Now, all things being equal, let's chalk that up to a clerical error. But despite being printed in an official Coast Guard publication, and despite the City of Baltimore and the Silver Star being real ships, there's no actual evidence that this happened. No ship's logs, no official reports, not even a letter home describing the event. Can you imagine getting that letter? Dear Mary, guess what happened at work today? Aside from that, there's no evidence of a ship of that name ever existing. No records of it being built, and not in any shipping registries. And even though the article says that several ships heard the harrowing distress calls, it appears that no one bothered to record them, which is very odd. There are some other glaring holes in the story, but let's go back a few years and see what we can find. The first major report of the incident was a series of 3 articles in a Dutch-Indonesian newspaper in 1948. The story is mostly the same as the later version, but with significant differences. The final article in the series concludes with this disclaimer. This is the last part of our story about the mystery of the Ourang Medan. we must repeat that we don't have any other data on this mystery of the sea, nor can we answer many of the unanswered questions in the story. It may seem obvious that this is a thrilling romance of the sea. On the other hand, the author, Silvio Shirley, assures us of the authenticity of the story. Red flag number 1. No evidence, only the word of the author. In the articles, the name of the ship that found the Ourang Medan is never mentioned, but the location of the counter is described as 400 nautical miles southeast of the Marshall Islands, which is roughly 4,000 miles from the Straits of Malacca. That seems an important detail to get that wrong. The article describes the experiences of the sole survivor of the Ourang Medan, who was found by an Italian missionary and natives of the Marshall Islands. The man tells the missionary that the ship was carrying a badly stowed cargo of sulfuric acid and that most of the crew died of the poisonous fumes escaping from broken containers. He tells the missionary that the ship was sailing from an unnamed Chinese port to Costa Rica and deliberately avoided the authorities. This sole survivor, an unnamed German, died after telling his story to the missionary, who then told the story to the author Silvio Shirley of Trieste, Italy. Red flag number 2, this is a third-hand account. Somebody told somebody who told somebody who told the newspaper. That's a pretty long chain of somebodies. Red flag number 3, no names are used in the article. The name of the survivor, the name of the port, the name of the ship that found the Ourang Medan. This is the ghost ship equivalent of something happening to your cousin's brother's girlfriend. This story itself doesn't have much more credibility than the other. So let's go back even further. Recently, Estelle Hargraves of the Skittish Library uncovered reports of the incident taken from the Associated Press in British newspapers the Daily Mirror and the Yorkshire Evening Post. This time from 1940, a full 7 years before the incident was supposed to have taken place. Besides that glaring incongruity, there were other major differences in the story, the location being the Solomon Islands this time, and the SOS message is different from later reports. The Ourang Medan is also listed as a steamship, not a freighter. The story comes from the Associated Press with no author given, but still appears to originate with Trieste, Italy. So could it have been the same author, Silvio Shirley? Perhaps. It's possible the story may not have gotten the traction he wanted, so he changed it up, added some details, and had it printed again. It's also possible that Trieste, Italy, being a port city, is rife with nautical terror tales, sailors being a stereotypically superstitious bunch, and this is merely another version of the same ghost story being told from ship to ship. As to what really happened, many hypothesize that the Ourang Medan may have been involved in smuggling operations and deliberately changed its name and falsified its registry. A combination of potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin, when mixed with seawater entering the ship's cargo holds, would have released toxic gases, which then caused the crew to succumb to asphyxia and/or poisoning. Later, the seawater would have reacted with the nitroglycerin, causing the reported fire and explosion. Some point to clandestine wartime operations that could account for the lack of information. Deliberate covering up of the event and sowing misinformation to hide the transportation of chemical agents that may have caused the disaster. Even more sinister is the theory of Unit 731. According to this theory, a Japanese bacteriologist named Shiro Ishii conducted terrible experiments during the Second World War and developed the horrible biological weapon known only as Unit 731 sometime in 1932. This weapon, released accidentally among an unwitting foreign crew hired to smuggle the agent, led to their horrific deaths, and the ship was deliberately scuttled to hide the evidence of this. The most likely theory, of course, is that it never happened. A ghost story that grew out of hand, changing details with each retelling. Real or not, it makes for a very interesting tale, and a great game from Supermassive Games.